While I was picking up my son from daycare, my phone buzzed. One text, 12 words ripped my life apart. Moving to Spain with love. I emptied our savings. Good luck paying rent. I froze in the parking lot, rain hitting the windshield like applause for my failure. My 4-year-old Rowan was inside coloring clouds he still believed would rain candy. I looked at his tiny hands when he ran to me, hands that trusted I'd keep his world steady. I swallowed the panic, forced a breath, and typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." She didn't reply. But hours later, when her plane landed in Barcelona, she finally checked her account. And what she found waiting there changed everything. My name's Evren Voss, and this is what happened when the woman I built a life for tried to erase me. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story touches you even a little, please subscribe. Every follow helps this channel reach someone who might be standing in the same rain, trying not to break. Friday came down in sheets, the kind of steady mountain rain that turns Patton Avenue into a ribbon of gray. I eased my old Jeep into the daycare lot, the cabin smelling like wet vinyl and goldfish crumbs, kids' laughter drifting through the glass while my pulse hammered a different rhythm. The buzz hit as I killed the engine. One text, 12 words. Moving to Spain with love. I emptied our savings. Good luck paying rent. My name is Evren Voss, 31 interior designer who traded showrooms for nap schedules. I didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then the door swung open and Rowan barreled at me, 4 years old. Dinosaur clutched his small hand, slipping into mine like it always had. I stared at that hand because I needed something solid. I swallowed the acid in my throat and typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." No exclamation, no why, just air. I buckled him in. The photo strip of our wedding, sun-bleached and curling, hung from the rear view like a nail in soft wood. "Is Mom making dinner?" he asked, hopeful. "We'll figure dinner," I said, steering through the rain and the suddenly too bright world. I didn't call Ariel. I didn't beg. I drove home past the breweries and murals, past the blue hills that usually slow my breathing. Not tonight. Home on Willow Lane smelled of damp pine and crayons. I set Rowan up with puzzles, opened the laptop and logged in. Savings zeroed out. Checking a handful of dollars playing dead. Rent due in days. Clients thin because I'd been choosing daycare pickups over site visits, and I would not apologize for that. I took a legal pad and wrote what I could control: sell the spare walnut slabs, the copper pendants, the industrial cartwheels. Postpone the truck tool order. Pitch 3 small kitchen jobs. Cancel the streaming bundle. On the first line of a fresh page, I wrote, "Keep calm," in front of Rowan. Everything else can wait. In the porch basket sat a fat stack of mail I'd ignored all week. A thick envelope I didn't recognize. I didn't open it. Not yet. If she could walk away in a text, this was never decided in a day. That thought sat with me while Rowan built a city of blocks and asked if clouds could rain candy. "Sure," I said, buying us a minute. After he fell asleep, I crept back to the kitchen and clicked the bank app again, as if numbers might grow under fluorescent light. They didn't. Outside, rain needled the gutters. Inside, the glow of the screen washed my hands a ghostly blue. I stared until the numbers blurred, until the wedding photo on the rear view in my head flickered and went dim, and the only sound left in the house was water and breath. 3 years earlier, we'd stood in this same kitchen, cardboard boxes stacked like towers, keys warm in my palm. We'd bought the place on a favorable loan with a temporary bridge from Ariel's mother, Evelyn Dane. I promised I'd pay it down fast. I turned the garage into a clean little shop, miter saw clamps, a reclaimed oak workbench I leveled with playing cards under one leg. I built our shelves, the nursery dresser, a coffee table from an old factory skid that still smelled of machine oil. We were going to grow roots here. Then the Madrid project arrived. 2 years back, Ariel's calendar bloomed with late calls, Spanish spilling through the bedroom door while I rinsed bottles and Googled rashes. I took fewer clients, learned to cut dovetails after bedtime, and pretended the distance was weather. 1 year back, we drove to Atlanta for Evelyn's birthday at the country club. The carpet was quiet and expensive, so were the people. My daughter deserves a man who doesn't make furniture in a garage. Evelyn said, eyes skating past my calloused hands. I laughed it off. In the hallway, a man lingered too close to Ariel's sharp suit, easier laugh, a look that didn't bother pretending. Dante, she said when I caught up, colleague in Europe. We shook. His grip was dry and practiced. The signs were there long before the text. A New York hotel charge that landed the same day she met a client on Zoom. An internal email chain I saw over her shoulder once, the casual we and her back and forth with someone named Rojas D. Saturday mornings, she'd stand in the doorway of the shop, eyes narrowing, and say we should sell off some of this stuff to declutter, like our life together was a storage unit she was prepping for auction. Tonight, with Rowan asleep down the hall, the rain finally thinning, I took the porch mail to the table. The thick envelope held a PTA meeting notice and a small unmarked parcel. Inside the parcel, a USB with tax scrawled in ballpoint. I held it in my palm and didn't plug it in. Not yet. A father's paranoia is a blunt instrument. I didn't want to swing it and hit the wrong thing. I thought about the months after Rowan was born, the fog I clawed out of with therapy and long walks and sanding walnut until the grain felt like a river under my fingers. I knew how easily a history like that could be twisted into a weapon. I opened my banking again, hunting for anything I'd missed. A string of small transfers winked in the ledger, 205075, dripping out over weeks to an account in Atlanta tagged only ED. I wrote it down, ED. Evelyn Dane. My stomach tightened. I went to the file drawer where we kept home documents, expecting dust. Instead, I found a neat binder tabbed in recent. In the pocket, a photocopy of the loan agreement we'd used to take Evelyn's temporary bridge. There, in neat legal type, sat an addendum I didn't remember reading. In the event of separation, lender may call the note due in full at lender's discretion. At the bottom, Ariel's initials marked the margin where someone, Evelyn, her attorney, had added the clause before signing. My initials sat beside hers. I had signed it. Maybe I was holding Rowan that day. Maybe I was thinking about paint colors and cabinet pulls and how to build a life on the cheap without it looking cheap. I ran a thumb over the paper, feeling for the moment the crack began. In the living room, the dinosaur city lay half-toppled from an earlier earthquake, only we felt. I slid the USB into the drawer and shut it gently as if the room might wake. Then I went back to the kitchen, wrote "Call Cameron Legal" at the top of a fresh page and underneath it, because it was the only prayer I had left: do not let them use my past to steal my son. Outside, the rain finally broke into single drops, slow and spaced, like a metronome counting me into the next move. Rowan slept like a small animal curled against the pillow. The house breathed slow and steady. I sat at the kitchen table with the porch light on the USB labeled tax balanced on my palm like a stupid talisman. The cloud password was one I'd used for years, the old anniversary date, and it still opened the same folders we'd never bothered to clean. I clicked through until I found a file labeled Custody Strategy, and my chest went hollow. There was a draft email to an attorney. I didn't recognize a cold list of talking points, references to my history of depression, notes about functional instability, suggestions for expert testimony. My name was in there in a way that felt edited into the future as evidence waiting to be weaponized. Beneath it, a screenshot of a flight itinerary, Asheville to Miami. Then Barcelona, Ariel Dane, confirmation number Hotel Elborn. The date matched the text she'd sent me. She hadn't gone on a last-minute trip. She'd booked months ahead. I ran my thumb along the tiny black drive and thought about all the late nights I had traded for daycare pickups. I thought about the mornings sanding walnut and the evenings making chicken nuggets while Ariel took client calls that bled into midnight. I opened the drawer where we kept the mail and pulled a small envelope I'd left unopened out of habit. Inside was a handwritten note folded small, the ink slightly smudged. Mother, thank you for the Barcelona deposit. D and I can finally start. D and I. Dante. The name landed like a stone. I photographed the note with my phone and labeled the image D. Yida, Dante Rojas. I called the bank before dawn because sometimes, for the sake of anger, you need to move faster than the grief. The representative at SunTrust checked the transaction logs and read numbers off like whether a large withdrawal authorized through the Atlanta branch recurring small transfers to an account listed only as ED Foundation. My fingers went numb. I wrote ED Foundation and circled it twice. Evelyn Dane. The initials didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. I texted images to Cameron Lee, my college friend turned lawyer in Raleigh, and waited. Cameron called back within the hour. His voice was steady, the kind of steadiness you want from a person whose job is to make the world obey facts. "Get everything you can," he said. "Document dates, screenshots, emails. If she's showing income from abroad, we can move to freeze accounts. Don't confront her. This isn't about pride. It's about safety for you and for Rowan." I felt a rush of relief that someone else would make sense of this, and a heavier weight that sense was now my burden to prove. That night I opened Ariel's old email in the dark, fingers clumsy. I found a chain I hadn't noticed before, exchanges with an address at Horizon Media Barcelona and an attached contract that started in 48 hours. There was an itemized relocation allowance and a contact listed in the United States, Evelyn Dane. The plan wasn't impulsive. It had been folded into paperwork, stamped and signed. I scrolled until my eyes burned. There was an Excel file tucked deeper with the name LLC Spare and a column marked Owner Voss Holdings LLC. My name was typed there like someone had printed me into an identity I'd never chosen. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if walls had been built around me while I slept. I didn't call Ariel. The impulse to yell, to beg, flashed and then died. Cameron was right. I needed proof, not performance. I started a log on my phone, every message, date, and time, who said what. I wrote down the nights she'd come home smelling of hotel soap, the day the country club hostess had told me to put down my hands and mind my appearance. I wrote down the invoice numbers, the flight confirmation, the bank reference. I wrote at the bottom of the first page in block letters, "Protect Rowan. Protect the truth." The CPU fan in my laptop whispered, and then the house was only me and the glow of screen light and the soft, absurd certainty that my life had become evidence. I slid the USB back into the drawer and closed it like a book I was not yet ready to read cover to cover. I left before dawn, the Jeep loaded with a thermos and a single sadness. I dropped Rowan at June's house, June, the neighbor who'd taught him how to whistle on a borrowed kazoo, and told her I'd be back after dark. The highway was a ribbon of wet glass and radio static. Charlotte felt like a different climate, hotter and more polished than our Asheville damp. Horizon US Media sat with the sterile confidence of a company that believes image is a product. I walked in expecting a receptionist and a smile and left with a list of answers. The front desk clerk recognized me. "Ariel's husband, right? I'm sorry, she resigned a couple of weeks ago. 2 weeks. The date matched the last Monday she'd told me she had a work thing." My jaw tightened until it ached. I pretended to have an appointment, and the receptionist, polite and oblivious, buzzed me up to the 9th floor where the HR files lived in neat metal cabinets and people wore earphones like helmets. I asked if there was any public record confirming her employment status, and the HR woman scanned a terminal. She filed her resignation, she said, effective 2 weeks ago. "We have her exit paperwork here." When she turned to get something, a stack of interoffice mail sat in a wooden tray like an island. One envelope was addressed ED Foundation, Finance Division. I picked it up under the pretense of returning a misshelved letter and photographed the contents with my phone. Inside were line items and wires out to foreign accounts. My thumb trembled as I hit send to myself. I felt foolishly like a thief, and the truth felt like contraband. I wandered the floor with the posture of a man looking for the right piece of a puzzle he'd been given. Sam Hayworth, a man whose laugh once filled studio evenings, saw me and slackened. He gave me a look that said he hadn't wanted this. When I asked about Dante Rojas, Sam hesitated, then said they've been talking about Barcelona for months, said it was an expansion. Evelyn put money up. Evelyn, the name again. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded, and in a small act of confession pulled a photocopy of Ariel's file from a drawer and showed me the signature on the sponsorship agreement, E. Dane. The ink was certain and small, a shorthand of complicity. I left the building with the documents on my phone and a new kind of disquiet. On the drive out of the glass towers into a light rain, my email chimed. Ariel had sent something to our joint account, one line, sharp as a blade. Don't look for me. Everything is legal. If you make a scene, I will show you are unstable. Then mother has a lawyer. The sentence sat there like a landing strip. I read it twice, then drove until the city lights blurred, and I could not tell which way was home. I felt no betrayal so much as the keen cold of a plan revealed. It wasn't just about being left. It was about character assassination, about moving my name into forms and ledgers, and then turning those forms into chains. I called Cameron on the way back, voice steady enough to be believed. They've been coordinating, I said. Evelyn's in the mix. Ariel's contract starts in 48 hours. He listened and then said the thing I needed to hear. We act on facts. We collect, we freeze, we keep Rowan out of the middle. Don't confront her. Let the record speak. I looked at the road, the dark trees leaching into night, and repeated it to myself until it was not a plan, but a weathered promise. I drove back through the rain to Willow Lane, to the house where piston memories and a checklist waited. I pushed open the door and the smell of home flooded me, hot oiled wood and baby shampoo. And for the first time since the message, the list on my legal pad felt less like a to-do and more like a map. I drove back to Asheville under a sky that had finally cleared to slate the Jeep, humming like a nervous animal. Rowan slept against his pillow in the rear, small breaths even, and trusting, and the house smelled of coffee gone cold. I waited until the house held only that slow, easy sound. Then I plugged the USB labeled tax into the laptop and watched the cursor think. The cloud folder opened like a drawer, and there it was, a folder named Custody Strategy, and another I did not expect buried deep and labeled LLC Documents.pdf. My hands felt too big. The PDF showed a Florida registration for Voss Holdings LLC, my name listed as the owner on the certificate of formation, and a signature block where Evelyn Dane's name had been stamped as the incorporator. Below that, a ledger showed regular deposits from an account titled ED Foundation and a trail of payments routed to Horizon Global EU. My heart dropped into a hollow I did not want to name. If anyone presented this to a judge without context, it would read like a confession. They could say I was laundering money through a company in my name that I stood to gain from overseas accounts, that I had motive and means. I closed the file and opened the bank app again, as if the numbers would rearrange themselves into something less ugly. They did not. I called Cameron that night and left him a terse voicemail. I need you. He answered on the second ring. When I sent him the PDF and the email screenshots, his voice went small and precise the way it always did when he was about to do the thinking I needed. He said the words I was both terrified and strangely relieved to hear. This looks like classic shell company structure, and we should assume malicious intent. He told me to avoid any direct confrontation with Ariel, and to gather everything digital, everything paper. He said he would prepare emergency filings to freeze the accounts if we could prove the funds were being misdirected, and that Ariel still had financial ties to Horizon in Barcelona. I told him I would try to get a confirmation from their HR without alerting anyone. I composed an email under my own name to Horizon Global's HR, feigning a simple civic curiosity. Could they confirm employment dates for Ariel Dane? I clicked send and then let the house swallow me for a moment. 2 days later, an auto reply came through, and then a careful reply from a human resources coordinator confirming an active contract and giving a payroll routing number. The number matched one of the accounts tied to Voss Holdings. I read the reply 3 times until the letters blurred and finally let myself exhale. Cameron filed for an emergency asset freeze with the county court, citing probable fraud and misrepresentation of identities. The motion had to be clean and precise. The judge would not be kind to theatrics. He told me to expect resistance. He told me to expect Evelyn to mobilize money and lawyers, and the kind of social pressure that could make a small-town judge flinch. On the 4th night, my phone rang at midnight. The ID said, Atlanta. Evelyn's voice unspooled like silk and then like steel. She told me I was making a mistake and offered propriety and mercy in the same breath. Cooperate, she said, and she would ensure Rowan's future. The offer was a threat soaked in civility. I did not use the swear I wanted. Instead, I said simply, I won't sell my son's future for silence. I hung up and sat with the burn of adrenaline until dawn, then crawled to the bench in the shop and started cataloging everything again. I dated each file, wrote down times, preserved the metadata for Cameron. I drew up a timeline from the first strange hotel charge to the deposits into ED Foundation, and from there to the corporate documents. I stapled printouts, wrote notes in the margins like a detective who still believed in evidence over rhetoric. At the bottom of the sheet I wrote Day 12, begin active evidence collection for court. The sentence felt like a vow. I did not sleep well after that. When Rowan woke, he hopped into my lap and asked for pancakes. I made them and told him stories about the little workbench I used to fix a chair, and for the few minutes his face was all eyes and crumbs, the war half evaporated. A summons arrived 10 days after Cameron filed the motion. Ariel had filed papers seeking temporary emergency custody citing instability and what her petition called recent erratic behavior and mental health concerns. I read it in the kitchen with my face in my hands, the words a strange echo of things I had tried to bury. The court date was a week away. Cameron was blunt, the papers were designed to flip the script. His job was not only to show the court the money trail, but to demonstrate motive on their side, not mine. He needed an alibi for the origin of funds and proof that Ariel retained active employer relationships overseas. Something else arrived that night, a call from a number with a Spanish country code. I almost ignored it, but something in the voice, a tiredness and ache, made me answer. The man introduced himself as Dante Rojas. He spoke quickly in English with a clipped accent. He said he had been Ariel's colleague, and then hesitated as if the hesitation might be the only honest thing left in the conversation. He told me the plan had been in motion for months and that he was done with it. He said he had documents proving transfers to Liechtenstein and screenshots of conversations in which Evelyn explicitly suggested creating a paper trail to implicate me if anything went wrong. He said the account in Liechtenstein held $200,000 earmarked for relocation, and that the account was opened in my name without my knowledge. He asked if I could trust him. Cameron listened to a forwarded voice message I sent. The man offered to provide everything if Cameron could assure him immunity from prosecution. Cameron negotiated a narrow deal, full cooperation, in exchange for a clean letter from the district attorney indicating no prosecution for Dante provided his testimony was truthful and complete. It was not a beautiful arrangement, but it was a tool, and tools are what we had needed. Within 24 hours, I had a folder on my desktop full of emails, screenshots of wire transfers, and a recording Dante had made where Evelyn's voice, unmistakable and crisp, said, "Once he is under investigation, we will have grounds to keep the child." I felt a sickness when I heard it, a shame not for what I had done, but for how easily my life could be used as a sock puppet in someone else's play. Cameron filed an amended motion attaching Dante's documents, and the court set a hearing to decide whether to freeze international assets and whether to grant temporary custody to me while an investigation unfolded. The county clerk called to say the judge had read the motion and that ex parte relief was possible given the evidence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a brittle hope. Ariel responded the way I expected. Her lawyers sent a letter insisting any document Dante supplied was tainted and that he had motive to lie. Evelyn's attorney countered Cameron's filings with threats of their own release medical records, they said, and show the court that Everin's past treatment for a depressive episode rendered him unfit. That night, an anonymous email landed in my inbox with a subject line that said nothing and whose body contained my own medical intake notes from 2019. The sender claimed to be protecting a child and suggested that unless I withdrew my motions, my private history would be public. For a moment, the old fear rose up, the one that had once curled me into corners and made me whisper apologies to an empty house. But I had spent 2 years with a therapist reconstructing myself, and the thought of losing Rowan to an invented narrative made me steadier than I had ever been. I called Cameron and told him to submit the medical notes as context, but not as disqualifying evidence. Transparency, he said, would neuter the weapon. The morning of the hearing was smothered in fog. Cameron and I drove to Charlotte with the trunk full of printouts and a nervousness that felt almost holy. We walked into the courtroom and saw Ariel on the other side of the room, eyes rimmed with fatigue, Evelyn like an immovable sculpture at her shoulder. The judge, a woman whose face seemed mapped by patience, listened as Cameron laid out the sequence-forged corporate filings transfers from a foundation controlled by Evelyn, an employment contract active in Barcelona, and Dante's sworn statement. Ariel's counsel responded with objections, and with an attempt to paint me as emotionally unstable. The judge weighed evidence and asked pointed questions. She asked Evelyn if she had any involvement in the creation of Voss Holdings. Evelyn's answer was a practiced denial. Then Cameron produced the recording. There was a long, heavy silence after the file played. The judge ordered an immediate temporary freeze on accounts tied to the foundation and to any entities matching the corporate papers, and she granted me temporary custody pending further discovery. The relief that washed through me was enormous and animal and wet with exhaustion. Walking back to the car, Rowan with his small hand in mine, the world felt simultaneously perilous and possible. I understood then that the fight ahead would not be over in a day or a ruling. It would be a long crossing. But for the first time in weeks, I could look at Rowan and know with a certainty that settled into my chest that I had done the thing I was meant to do, protect him. The morning air outside Mecklenburg County Courthouse had the color of steel. Frost crawled along the edges of the windows, and the light filtering through the high panes felt sterile like a surgical lamp. I sat beside Cameron, my lawyer and oldest friend, the man who'd helped rebuild my case from ash. The folder between us was thick enough to bend the clasp inside it every email, bank statement, and recording Dante Rojas had sent. Across the aisle sat Ariel and her mother, both polished, both still as portraits. Evelyn Dane's expression was the kind that could peel paint. Ariel's was harder to read, less defiance than fatigue, maybe the look of someone who'd forgotten which mask she'd put on last. Her attorney started first voice firm and trained for effect. He described me as an emotionally unstable father with inconsistent income and a history of depressive episodes. The words fell like stones. Cameron touched my shoulder without looking at me. "Don't bite," he whispered. "Let me handle this." So I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the back row where Rowan sat coloring quietly beside a social worker, his small feet not touching the floor. That was my reason. That was the only audience that mattered. When our turn came, Cameron's voice cut through the courtroom like sandpaper on glass. He placed the thank you card on the judge's desk, the one Ariel had written to her mother thanking her for the Barcelona deposit. He let the silence stretch until even the clerk looked up. "Mrs. Dane," the judge said finally, "is this your handwriting or your daughter's?" Evelyn blinked once, then twice, and replied, "I don't recall." Her diamond earring caught the light. The room was thick with the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Cameron opened his laptop and connected it to the court's projector. Email chains between Ariel and Dante appeared on the screen, every line of polite deceit in black and white. The judge read each page. Attached to one thread was the Horizon Global contract and a routing number for the Liechtenstein account. My name was printed in the top corner as the listed owner. I looked at Ariel. She stared at her hands. When the judge called for a 15-minute recess to verify the documents, I walked into the hallway and waited. Ariel found me there. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low, frayed around the edges. "My mother's sick. She wanted to make sure Rowan had security if I couldn't provide it." I almost laughed. "She doesn't want security," I said. "She wants control, and you handed her the keys." Her eyes shimmered as if she'd say more, but instead she turned and walked away, her heels clicking down the corridor. When we reconvened, Cameron played the audio file Dante had recorded, Evelyn's voice sharp and exact, saying, "We only need a small push. His medical record will do the rest." A single sentence, but it echoed like a hammer on marble. The judge paused, her writing eyes narrowing. You could feel the air shift. When the ruling came, it was mercifully brief. The court ordered the immediate freeze of all accounts tied to the Evelyn Dane Foundation, transferred temporary custody of Rowan to me, and barred Ariel from leaving U.S. soil until the financial investigation concluded. Cameron exhaled. The clerk stamped the orders. The sound was final, like a gavel against bone. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn brushed past us. "You'll regret this," she murmured. I met her eyes and said softly, "You already do." I drove home in silence. Rowan fell asleep in the back seat, head tilted toward the window, sunlight flickering across his cheek like a blessing. I didn't feel victory, only a strange exhaustion that settled into my spine. I'd spent months holding my breath, and now the air felt heavy in my lungs. Still, there was movement, the slow drift of things righting themselves. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 87. The court saw a piece of the truth. The rest she'll face when she lands. 2 weeks later, the snow began to melt on the eaves of my workshop, and the silence that followed the hearing felt almost fragile. The court had appointed me temporary trustee over the frozen accounts until the forensic audit finished. Cameron and a team of accountants from Raleigh combed through the digital debris left behind by the Danes. What they found was cleaner and uglier than either of us expected: a chain of wire transfers moving from the Evelyn Dane Foundation through Luxembourg, then Zurich, and finally to Horizon Global's European branch. Each payment arrived in an account labeled Voss Holdings LLC, my name, their invention. Now, by court order, that same shell company was converted into the Rowan Trust Fund, overseen by a state-appointed fiduciary. I didn't want their money, but I wanted it to grow clean and untouched, something my son could build a life on. Friday morning, Cameron called, his voice threaded with disbelief. They tried another angle, he said. Horizon Global in Barcelona had received an anonymous email accusing me of falsifying documents to ruin Ariel's reputation, but the sender's IP address traced back to Evelyn's office computer in Atlanta. By afternoon, FBI investigators had a warrant. Evelyn was charged with wire fraud and identity misuse. When Cameron told me, I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet, dry kind of justice, like a room being aired out after a storm. Before submitting the final documentation to the court, I made one move of my own. I redirected the funds that once sat in Voss Holdings into the Rowan Trust. When the bank confirmed the transfer, I imagined Ariel's reaction when she'd open her app expecting 6 digits and find nothing. A message would pop up on her phone: account closed under U.S. court order. I didn't need to gloat. The numbers would speak for themselves. It was mid-morning when the call came from an international number. I was frying eggs, Rowan humming a cartoon song at the kitchen table. What did you do to my account? Ariel's voice trembled on the other end. I set down the pan and said, It was never your account. It's our son's. That's Justice Ariel, the kind you mistook for cruelty. She didn't respond. I heard an announcement over an airport loudspeaker, then static, and the line went dead. A month later, the final rulings arrived. Ariel lost custody, granted only supervised visits twice a year. Evelyn received a suspended sentence and a lifetime ban from managing charitable funds. The remainder of their assets, what the court called tainted capital, was permanently reassigned to the Rowan Trust Fund. Dante Rojas signed his immunity deal and left the country within days, a ghost with clean hands. Spring came early that year. On a pale morning in March, I sat on the porch of my workshop while Rowan painted beside me. He dipped his brush into blue, then green, then yellow, telling me the sky needed fixing because it was too plain. I watched him and realized he was right. The world looked washed out until he touched it. For the first time in months, I thought of Ariel not with anger, but with a distant kind of pity, like remembering a song I once loved before I understood its lyrics. Cameron stopped by that afternoon with 2 cups of coffee. It's over, he said. You can finally start over. I smiled at him, the kind that doesn't reach for relief but settles into gratitude. I already did, I said. The day she sent that message. That night after Rowan fell asleep, I opened my notebook and wrote the last entry. Day 104. When she landed, her balance was gone. But here, my son's laughter fills the house, and that's the only fortune I'll ever need to keep. Sometimes life ends not with a crash, but with a quiet message that changes everything. I thought that text would destroy me, but it didn't. It stripped away the illusion and left what was real, a father and his son building something honest from the wreckage. Justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. It looked like waking up to laughter instead of lies. If you've ever been left behind, if you've ever had to rebuild from ashes, I hope my story reminds you that loss can be a beginning too. If this story found you, let me know you're here. Say I'm listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it touched something in you, please subscribe. Every follow helps this channel reach someone who might be standing in the rain trying to hold it together. You're not alone. You never were.